Now, this, folks, is a tough sell. In the month of selling your brand, your conference, this is the toughest one right here. ACC Kickoff today in Charlotte. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Breaking down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Appreciate you being here. And again, we will go through what was discussed and promoted at ACC Kickoff. They can't be like everyone else and call it ACC Media Days, but that's what it is. Media Days for the ACC that run for the next 4 days with 17, count them, 17, that many teams. And considering the state of the league, considering what's going on in court right now, considering the two top programs are in court against the ACC, and considering that they are primarily the college football playoff past for the ACC, essentially they are the past college football playoff participants for the ACC that Jim Phillips, the conference commissioner, bragged about today. But more so, they are the future most likely in the playoff. Miami may have something to say about that. It was kind of tough to get around all of that. There were 3 new teams that, of course, needed to be talked about, and SMU did arrive today. The other teams later this week, meaning Stanford and Cal. I believe they both go together. Let's see. Yes, on Tuesday. But there was so much talk about the college football playoff and about reporters treading lightly, I would say. I watched all of the Q&A with Commissioner Jim Phillips, and certainly the reporters that asked questions wanted to move in that direction. They certainly went there involving Clemson and Florida State, but it was not something that they hit rather hard. And that may have been preempted by Jim Phillips' opening statement. I did not hear that. I heard the question and answer, did not hear the opening statement. So there must have been something that was a qualifier there about treading lightly on the Clemson-Florida State saga. Big week here at the Voice of College Football, ACC Kickoff. As you can say, 4 big days for the ACC. And then, of course, the Big Ten Media Days launch in Indianapolis on a Tuesday. We will be on location. Yes, we will. Here at the Voice of College Football. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we will be on location at the Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. Someday we hope to get to all the media days and have representation on location covering media days. However, with technology, is it really that important? No. It's a nice thing to do, good thing to do. You get a bit of a different aspect, feel, perspective being there, but all the clips, everything's available. And so be looking out for the remainder of the week, because we will have coaches and player interviews posted to all the various Big Ten channels. So be looking out for those. And we can't forget, as I was reminded yesterday when I said, well, we got Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, Iowa. Got to take care of those. Those are the priorities before anybody else in the Big Ten. So before you talk to James Franklin or Penn State players or Wisconsin players, you got to hit those 4 because we got team channels. Oh, yeah, USC and Oregon. So we got 6 Big Ten channels. And so, again, we will have interview clips from coaches and players, and hopefully some media personalities as well, as we did last year, talking to Todd Blackledge and Joshua Perry. Anybody else? I know those 2. Can't remember anybody else that we caught up with last year. All right, ACC Kickoff. And even though Florida State was in the mix today, and we certainly want to know what Mike Norvell had to say, I did not get to that clip yet. Couldn't find it. And also SMU and Georgia Tech on this day 1. Of course, this is about the conference, more so than any other conference media days. The Big 12 would be number 2 in line, because the future of the Big 12 is uncertain, but more so in a positive direction. They seem to be locked in and stable. Seem to be. You can't assume anything these days in realignment, but it appears as though the Big 12 is locked and loaded for the future, and they're stable at 16, looking to expand. Of course, Clemson and Florida State would be at the top of the wish list, and then on down the line, that next tier of ACC teams for the Big 12. And Brett Yormark, unlike some of the other commissioners, and certainly Jim Phillips, is in a aggressive posture of we're in good shape. Look at what we've done the last 2 off seasons, fortifying our league with the 4 from the group of 5. And then we went and got the 4 corner schools from the Pac-12, and we've bulked up from losing the 2 to get to 8, added another 4. We're in great position at 16, but we are always looking. We are always aggressively looking forward. Got to admire Brett Yormark in that way. He knows his league is number 3 in football revenue and relevance. I'm not comparing them on the field in terms of football this season with the ACC. We will do that at some point. It's a rather close call. But Jim Phillips has to play a bit of defense, unfortunately. But he tried to spin it into positives, and we will look at that. We have left the link in the description section. The chat, in fact, has the link to the show if you want to give me a call and talk ACC football and anything involving the ACC. We hope to get Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football, and I apologize to anyone out there that will be showing up at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, because that was our initial time slotted for this show. However, we thought that Tony was going to be able to join us earlier. Wanted to make it convenient for him, of course. He's on location there in Charlotte and has a lot of things to deal with concerning Last Word on College Football. So he's probably trying to get a story in plus. And so we certainly want to cater to him and his schedule. But I just got done watching Jim Phillips from the podium. He was asked about Florida State, Clemson, and the big non-conference games that they play and the perception of the league and needing to win the big non-conference games. And certainly Jim Phillips acknowledged those 2 schools. He didn't acknowledge them by name as many times as he should have. And I believe we've got Tony jumping on the line right now. Good stuff. Tony, thank you so much.
Yep, I can hear you.
You got me?
Yep, I got you.
Great.
You can hear me?
We've got you. We've got you.
All right.
I was just getting into Jim Phillips' comments, so you have joined us at just the right time to take it away in regards to how it hit you, what hit you, and what you thought was important.
Yeah, I think well, I think, and I'll jump in because my signal has you breaking up a little bit. I think it's just the poor signal here. So, I'll run through it that way. But I think what we saw from Phillips was a little bit more feistiness than what we generally have seen. He came out, obviously, look, he can't discuss the specifics of any of the lawsuits, but he can kind of give an overall theme. And really, this is the first time he's talked about the lawsuits in any great detail. And what he did was he actually referred to them as destructive to the conference overall and a disruption. And it's clear that, frankly, more pissed off about it than I think we generally see out of Jim Phillips. And I think part of what it is he knew he was going to get asked. He knew it was the first topic. So he addressed it in his opening remarks before he took about a half hour of Q&A from the media. But he committed the conference to these lawsuits all the way through. Now, that sounds good. But you and I know, because we've discussed it, they're all in the appellate process right now, which could take a year, 2 years, maybe more. So the idea of fighting them all the way through It sounds good. It sounds defiant. It sounds strong. But the reality of it, could be something different. He said, the contracts were signed. They were signed in 2013. The revisions were signed in 2016, and that the contracts are no different than they were when you signed them. Do you believe in them or not? Well, again, it sounds good, but you and I both know the college sports landscape and the finances of the college sports landscape have changed dramatically since those were signed, and that's really what's at issue with both schools, even though they're handling them differently. Clemson has accepted that the grant of rights is a valid contract. What they're looking for is judicial declarations as to where there's some wiggle room, if you will, while Florida State wants the whole thing thrown out and just done, and declared null and void. But he said, look, everybody signed it, and this is the way it is, and only two schools are trying to fight it. Well, again, yes and no. These, to me, Florida State and Clemson, because they're the top of the conference, they're almost like the canary into the coal mine. Everyone else is waiting to see how that works. And if the canary comes back out alive, there are going to be some other canaries going to court with their attorneys to try and get out. But he said that they've endured 6 months of disruption with the legal cases. And he said it's not good for anyone. And he said now his staff, he's made sure that they don't treat the schools any differently as they're doing business with them. He made it clear that he took a staff, when the first lawsuit was filed back in December, that he took a staff aside and said, look, we are dealing with the student athletes of the university. They have nothing to do with the lawsuits. They're not a part of any of it. We have to compartmentalize, is the word he used. The lawsuits are here, everything else is over here. Now, once he said that, he said, well, let's also be clear. Not a day goes by, and this is a direct quote, not a day goes by that I do not spend at least part of my day dealing with the legal issues. So it's consuming him. He seems, frankly, a little bit more terse, I think is the word we used in the piece we published about an hour ago. A little bit more pissed off, frankly. But, he's dealing with it, and he says, he understands they're going to go on, and we don't know when they're going to end. But he says he's determined to keep going on them.
So, folks, Tony has just published a piece, The Last Word on College Football, with a deeper dive on what was discussed at ACC Kickoff today, and most specifically, of course, Jim Phillips from the podium. So you want to check that out, because Tony has been following this as closely as anyone. So it's not just verbatim what Jim Phillips said, which you can get anywhere. It's a lot of perspective on what it means. So I'll take it to this point, Tony. So the $40 million gap roughly between the ACC and the top two leagues was mentioned. Jim Phillips talked about, of course, it was announced, I lose track of time, maybe 6 months ago, of the uneven revenue distribution split that's being worked on, that has yet to be finalized, that he says is in the works. They've made a lot of progress. It's not going to be something that's going to be announced 2 or 3 years from now, that they're going to get this done, but also other revenue streams that they're working on, but that he couldn't name. Do you think these are significant strides toward?
No, they're not significant. Yeah, they're not significant. And I'll tell you why. The uneven distribution rewards schools. If you make it to the college football playoffs, you keep a disproportionate share of that before everybody else in the conference gets their piece of the pie. Whatever your if you make March Madness, the teams that make that are going to get a disproportionate piece of the pie before everybody else takes their bite. That's fine. But we're talking, that moves a couple million here and there. The gap between the ACC and the Big Ten or the SEC is $45 million per team per year. Now, the ACC just announced they are having their biggest distribution ever. They will, in the 2023-24 profile, they will put out about $45 million per school. Now, does that close the gap with the Big Two? No. But what it does do is put them ahead of the Big 12's distribution to its schools. Not by a lot, but by about $5-6 million. Now, to your question, these other sources of revenue, they're talking about more sponsorship money and, corporate partnerships. What they are not talking about is private equity, not for the conference. And Phillips made it clear he's got concerns when schools do it. He was very clear that, we all know it's been very public that Florida State is, looking at private equity money. We covered it a couple of weeks ago as well. His concern with getting into bed with private equity, and those are my words, not his, but his quote is, "Nothing is for free." What are you having to give away from your school? What are you selling off from your university or your athletic department in order to get that private equity investment? He wouldn't get into specifics on a per school basis, but he's got concerns along that level. And he was clear that the conference as a whole, while the Big 12, Brett Yormark says they're looking into it, the ACC is not for the conference. And you and I have had this discussion. The conferences don't really have what a private equity firm wants. Private equity firms want a seat at the table. They want a level of ownership. Well, but for a conference, a seat at the table is already owned by the school chancellors and presidents and whatever. It's easier for schools because you can put these private equity folks on the board of trustees or the board of governors or whatever, where they can have some role in the decision-making process. And you're not going to get them a decision-making role with a conference. Larry Scott tried to sell that pitch, 5 years ago, and how did that go? And he's made it clear he's not interested in having those discussions, not on a conference basis.
Tony, Clemson and Florida State are the headliners, and to go into a conference media days and to have this situation is, off the top of my head, unprecedented. And so almost every question that is posed to him, even if it's not directly about Clemson and Florida State, certainly with the 12-team college football playoff, it directs us straight to a past that has been nothing but Clemson and Florida State in the ACC and projects forward to as something close to that. So he just seems to have did his best to sidestep naming them specifically a few times, talking about like big non-conference games. Well, we think the entire league has big non-conference games, and on and on and on. It's just a difficult.
That's actually on one of the signs that they have here, which is bizarre. I think it's within my eye shot here. The toughest out-of-conference schedule in the country. That's fine. That's kind of an odd thing to put on a big banner in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel in uptown Charlotte. So look, he doesn't have an easy sell to begin with because, again, as you pointed out, it's Florida State and Clemson right now in terms of football. We don't have big expectations for Cal and Stanford. I actually think SMU will be better than a lot of people here are giving them. I actually think Preston Stone belongs in the conversation of one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. But he's got a tough pitch to begin with. And then you have this infighting. And, again, he said, and he laid it out clear, and we have it in the article, that it's destructive to the conference and the other schools. He was very specific to it's destructive and a distraction to the membership of the conference. Maybe, I don't know how much time, Virginia is spending going over the details of Florida State's lawsuit or Clemson's lawsuit or the ACC countersuits, so much as they're just looking at the executive summary of each hearing and whatnot and turning it over to their attorneys. it's distracting to him because he has to spend part of every day on it and can't really spend the days the way he wants, focusing on selling the conference.
May want to be careful with that toughest non-conference schedule metric, because is that telling us that every other conference is tougher? Because those are the teams that you're playing and putting on your non-conference schedule. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, wait a second. You're playing the Big Ten, so what does that say about the Big Ten's conference schedule? Yeah, it's an odd sales pitch, but they don't do things the regular way out here in Charlotte.
And the other oddity, Tony, again, because of the unusual circumstances, is that we've got 3 new teams headed to the league, and I didn't hear one question about them. Of course,
Nope.
That's the question anytime that we've had new teams enter these leagues the last few years, is that's the fresh topic, but not from what I heard.
And it's interesting, and I see my camera's bouncing around because I'm kind of balancing everything here in the middle of the lobby.
We appreciate it.
The SMU was here today. They've got SMU, Florida State, and Georgia Tech here in day one. And I talked to Rhett Lashley, the SMU coach, and it was interesting. And we'll have a piece on that actually later on tonight, early this evening. Look, SMU has been trying to get back into the football powers for decades. They got shut down by the NCAA in 1987. And 2-year ban, which turned into, 30 years in purgatory before, they started playing without a shot. This is very meaningful to them to be in a power conference. It's almost like they don't care which conference, just so they got a conference, right? And it's clearly not about the money, since they're going in for the first 7 to 9 years with none of the TV revenue. They wanted to be on the stage with the big players again, and they are. And I asked Lashley, have you talked to any of your colleagues in the coaching community that have come up from a G5, brought their program with them, from a G5 to a power conference? And he said, wow, it's a great question, because yes, I have. He spent a lot of time talking to Gus Malzahn. He actually talked to Gary Patterson, because Patterson was the coach at TCU, escorting them from a G5, into the Big 12. And he talked to Kyle Whittingham at Utah, because he brought them from the Mountain West into the Pac-12. Talked about, what it's like and what are the pitfalls. And I asked him what he learned. And he said one uniform thing, they all had different pieces of advice. One uniform thing across all of it was depth on the offensive and defensive lines will control your fate in a power conference. He said, you can get away with in the group of 5 in the American and whatever else. If there's kind of a sizable gap between your first string offensive lineman and your second string, you can still get away with it. In the power conferences, you cannot. You have to have a group 1 and group 1A. They got to be really right there with the group 1, or you're not going to survive when you start to get injuries. Your season is going to plummet. And he said, and you are going to get injuries. It's part of the game. That is what I learned. And he said he also talked to Neil Brown at West Virginia, because he wanted to know from Neil Brown's perspective, what is it like to play the new teams as they come in to a conference? And Brown said, you have to treat it like the same every week. Your team has to bring the same intensity level every week, regardless of who you're playing. You have to treat everybody like they're a potential conference champion in order to be competitive every week. So interesting perspective from Lashley about what it will take to compete in the ACC this year.
Those 4 new teams to the Big 12 last year from the American Conference and BYU went 8-28 in conference play against the Big 12. As you mentioned, although there was ultimate success for Utah and TCU, it took a few years. They took their lumps. some people might be a little surprised if they start to sift through the first, second, and third team all ACC of how many SMU players are going to show up because, like to your point, on the front lines, it's a pretty darn good football team.
It is, and and Lashley likes to run a wide open offense, and that's going to show up with the skill position players he's got. I don't know. I gotta tell you, hanging out with my media brethren, there's a lot of overlooking and underlooking SMU for my perspective. Are they going to win the conference? No. Competitive? Yeah. I think they're potentially a top 3 to 4 team in the conference.
We will be asking you, Tony, at the end of the week or the next time we get a chance to see you, if these discussions this week have changed your perspective on the conference race, but it's way too early at this point. So
it is. We got this is day one. I'm about to go up to the Florida State panel and chat with them. And so, yeah, we're here through Thursday. So we will catch up later on.
Excellent, Tony. We'll let you go so you can get a good seat there on the Florida State panel.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you, Tony.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Be well.
Tony Siracusa, last word on college football. So again, you get great perspective from Tony right here. Tony is in those courtrooms when they're in North Carolina. He's following all the cases, whether it be Clemson versus the ACC on both fronts. So consider that the ACC is suing Clemson as a countersuit once Clemson sued the ACC. Same thing with Florida State. So there are dual cases going on at the same time. Florida State in Florida District Court against the ACC, and then the ACC countersuit in North Carolina. And we're still getting to the point where it appears as though the ACC has won round one, which was simply these need to be filed and these court cases need to be conducted in the state of North Carolina. So we have basically cleared that hurdle based on my understanding. All right, again, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and SMU today. I like SMU as well. You could probably hear that in my words. We'll have our ACC predictions here in a few weeks, along with everyone else here at the Voice of College Football. And my preseason predictions are typically decent. The good and the bad, I will have to go through the various years and check it out and see how I've done. Now, in terms of picking the games from week to week, you may want to lock in on that. We will do just about as good as anybody that's not got handicapper or odds maker next to their name. We've got fall camp previews coming out. The one was posted today with Justin Adams from Nebraska. So we've got a full Nebraska fall camp preview, position by position. It's right here on this channel. So please check it out. As well as we've posted Virginia, Washington, Wake Forest, a few others, Oregon. So check out the fall camp previews. Program rankings. I'm working on them. I was going to say as we speak, but no, I've been talking to you for the last hour. So program rankings, though, for 2024, program rankings 1 through whatever the number is now, 135, are headed your way here in the next few days at the Voice of College Football. Think we will knock out a video that takes us like 135 to about 80. Then we'll do the next 40. Then we'll have a top 40 video. So again, program rankings, get your arguments ready for me. Also, keep in mind, it's a huge week here at the Voice of College Football because we got Big Ten Media Days. We'll be all over it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Big Ten Media Days, okay? And then, and we've got a guy on site. We've got our buddy JR is representing the Voice of College Football Big Ten Media Days. So we'll have all sorts of coaches interviews, player interview clips on all the Big Ten channels here: USC, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, and Iowa. Also this week, got to sit down with Steve Dace in just a few hours. That will be released later this week. So again, a sit down with Steve Dace today that will be released most likely on Wednesday. And then also I've got a conversation coming up on Tuesday with Phil Steele that to be released probably on Thursday. So a Wednesday, Thursday to look out for with Steve Days and with Phil Steele. And again, Big Ten Media Days all week with the Voice of College Football on location. Is there any possibility that Clemson and Florida State stay in the ACC? I don't see it. I've not seen it ever since they went past the line of public complaints to court. And once you go to court, it becomes messy because everything that you are bringing to the table is damaging and detrimental to the conference, and everything they bring to the table is detrimental and damaging to you. And it costs both sides ridiculous amounts of money. And so I don't believe that there's any turning back. I had a glimmer, just a glimmer of hesitancy for the first time in months concerning that issue when I heard Jim Phillips talk about revenue distribution. Of course, that's going to be uneven going forward concerning the playoffs. So that's going to favor the teams that make the playoffs from the ACC, whoever wins the conference for sure. And then probably a second place team, depending on record, would not have last year. Louisville, as the championship game loser, was not going to get to the playoff, but Florida State would have received going forward. Of course, they missed the playoffs, were not selected, but going forward, the ACC champ in the playoffs will get more money than everyone else. We could put together, actually, that might be a good video, put together some models on what that should look like, because we know that each Big Ten and SEC team will receive $21 million of playoff revenue. And for the ACC and the Big 12, it's 13 and 12 million. So if there's a unequal distribution, what would that look like? So it's going to put a couple $1 million in the hands of fill in the blank, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, each season. All right, let's get to the phone lines. We've got our buddy Jeffrey on the line. Jeffrey, what's going on, sir?
Glad to be back on the show. It's been a while.
Absolutely. It's good to see you, man.
It's good to see you too. I've been watching a lot of your videos still. You've been doing a fantastic job on all the videos you've done. I mean, it's crazy right now with you talking about football only being like a month and a half away. Actually less than that even. I mean, time's just flying by. Summer's been flying by. But, yeah, you're talking about the ACC with Florida State and Clemson and everything. And, I mean, I'm not going to get into anything else but this. I'll just say with that I feel we've seen this before about you can say that something's not going to happen, and then it does happen, right? So we just saw it happen with something else, and now we see it with this. I mean, you're saying, like you said on Twitter, that they're not going to leave, or they're not making any indication that they're going to leave. But all of the what we've been seeing is that they will. It looks like they will leave, but they're saying that they're not. That doesn't mean anything. Those are just words. They don't mean anything.
Yeah. So the last reaction we had here was the Brett McMurphy article that came out a couple of days ago, was that he had spoken to 3 university presidents from the SEC. I think he was a little less specific from the Big Ten, but then various sources from the Big Ten and the SEC that were basically saying, we are not taking Florida State. In particular, They were naming Florida State more so than Clemson. I think there was specific Florida State statements made. Clemson was more assumed because they were just saying, we're not taking anyone else right now. There's nobody out there of value. What I found interesting about that was, and I talked about it at the time, was the one thing maybe I've neglected to talk about, but I didn't know any specifics about, but maybe I should have addressed it more frequently, was their relationships are always important in these situations. So the money is the money, and the money is extremely important. And you could have the best relationship with Wake Forest, and the Big Ten is not taking Wake Forest. Even if they think they're the greatest people in the world, they're not going with Wake Forest. So yes, I'm not saying that the money is not paramount, but these guys interact, talking about presidents, chancellors, athletic directors, all those people all the time. So there are apparently some relationships there that aren't the best between Florida State and the Big Ten. And if the Big Ten is holding out for Notre Dame, which we know that it is, between Notre Dame and Florida State.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely a mess. I mean, the thing is, you've been watching.
Hopefully we still have you,
longer
Jeffrey.
than I have.
There you are. We lost you there for a second.
My internet keeps going in and out. Sorry
you're
about
good.
that. I don't know why. But
so you're just pointing out to everyone how old I am.
But I mean, like, I like talking to you because, I mean, it's like talking to my dad. I mean, you guys have both been watching sports for a very long time, and I love sports. I mean, I do. That's literally why, I started talking about sports as well, because it's something that I enjoy to do. But when I see all this going on with money driving everything, because it's wrong. I mean, it absolutely is. Even though at the end of the day, you should want to make money. I mean, that's why the NCAA is a business. Right, it's the way that it works. You have to make money, or there's no reason to even have you're not going to run. Your business is not going to run if you're not making money. But I mean, like you're talking about with this whole Florida State and the Notre Dame and all this stuff. We had the conversation last year, like Oregon State and Washington State. Like, we love those schools. Clint Moses, Connor Johnson, they're awesome guys. We love those guys. But no one wanted Oregon State. No one wanted Washington State. They didn't care, because they didn't make money. They just didn't. So they got left out. And it's like, like you said, Wake Forest. It doesn't matter how many great people that are there. It doesn't matter how much the Big Ten likes them. They're not going to take them because of the fact that they're not worth anything. Florida State is worth money. Notre Dame is, but relationships matter too. But I mean, all this stuff is just creating more problems. Because I saw your video about Indiana being on the list, of the bottom teams, possibly getting kicked out. And I know
there would be a
list. Saying this is going to happen, but
if there would be a list,
I know. I know you weren't saying they were. I'm just saying this shouldn't even be possible. It shouldn't even be a probability, because it is possible.
Yeah,
but
it is possible, because
that's what bothers me, because it shouldn't even be possible.
Yeah, because if these schools and these conferences are making cutthroat decisions about other schools, then why wouldn't they at some point look internally and say, well, Fox, what would you do if we can give you higher quality games, if we consolidate these leagues and kick out X, Y, and Z?
Absolutely. I mean, even as a kid, when I was watching the SEC, I'm like, the one school that just didn't make any sense was Vanderbilt. I'm like, why is Vanderbilt here? And I'm like, why are they here? They're horrible. I mean, they're good academically, they're good in baseball and some other sports, but their football and basketball teams are garbage. I mean, they're absolutely horrid outside of James Franklin, but he left for money. I mean, Vanderbilt couldn't keep him. I mean, it's just Indiana. They couldn't pay their offensive coordinator, and now he's the head coach of Alabama. They couldn't pay their defensive coordinators. The head coach of South Alabama, Kane Womack and Kalen DeBoer. I mean, Indiana can't afford, or they probably could. Indiana could, but they just don't pay money into football. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they could kick them out if they wanted to. And to me, I won't say it ruins my love for the sport, but like all these conversations, yeah, it drives conversation. I mean, people love talking about realignment. Like when people make videos on it, I mean, there's in live streams, tons of people are talking about it. It drives them to talk about this kind of stuff. But I think deep down, a lot of people don't like it. I don't. And I mean, I'm a younger guy, but I don't like it at all, because of the fact I just like the way college football was before, where you just couldn't wait for the fall, and you could not wait to just watch football games between rivals and the history of all the conferences. And at the forefront, it was the players and the coaches, and just these players wanting that dream of going off to the pros if they were good enough. And now it's just been swamped by, it's basically the NFL. Basically, it's all money. It's the same thing. It's amateurism is basically history. I mean, there's none of it left. There was a difference. That's why people like college football over the NFL. If you like that sort of thing, there were so many people that I knew that like watching college football just for the players having a chance to go pro and live their dream and make a living. Now it's like they make a living already, and there's nothing wrong with them making that living in college. I don't have an issue with it, but it's overtaking everything else college football was about. Because instead of us talking about the ACC, this is the ACC kickoff. We're supposed to be talking about the football games coming up, but we're talking about Florida State and Clemson possibly leaving and ruining the ACC.
Well, that's one thing I said to Tony a few minutes ago. I said, this does not happen at other conference media days where there are 3 new members to the league. That is always the talk.
And it doesn't matter.
And nobody mentions them.
Because no one cares about Cal and Stanford and SMU. They just don't care.
I also think that an attractive point to college football for a lot of people weren't just watching, can these players make it to the NFL and their trip to the NFL and then looking back, but I think it was a large part watching players that will never make the NFL because most of them won't. And knowing that this is an accountant, this is a future doctor, this is a future whatever, fill in the blank, but they're playing a big time game at Wisconsin and they're going to play in the Rose Bowl, but they're not a professional football player.
But it's the memories that were made. I mean, like, to your point, like, you'll have that in your brain forever. Like, even if you were like the lowest guy on the bench, your team was in the Rose Bowl or the Orange Bowl, whatever, like, you'll have that memory forever. And I agree. I mean, because in the past, going to college, like, you hear about players, you know, they're like 60 years old, even if they ended up becoming fantastic players in the pros, especially like in basketball. They didn't make a lot of money in professional basketball back in like 1960, 1970. They didn't make anything hardly. They had to have a second job. So it was like their parents wanted them to go to college to get that degree so they could get that job. That's why Stanford was so, it still is a desirable college, but not for the athlete, because that's why nobody good's going to Stanford. You know, like, people that are going to become pros or like they're projected 5 stars. They're going to go to Alabama. They're going to go to Ohio State. They're going to go to Georgia, because those schools have been set up where it's like, this is the best chance you're going to have to go off to the pros. But even if you had a pro future, possibly back in the past, it's like you wanted to go to Stanford. You wanted to go to a school that was going to give you the best education possible for your life outside of football. But see, now it's like everybody's brain is like, I want to make as much money. The fact that if you make the most money in the sport possible, then you don't even have to have a life outside of sports at all. Like, you just don't. It doesn't matter anymore. I mean, that's kind of an unfortunate thing, because I know that a lot of people are probably, you know, I guess you would say smart enough to do whatever they want outside of sports too, but it's because sports make so much money that, because look at basketball, you don't even have to play in the NBA. You can go overseas. People go overseas and make, you know, a few million over there. It's just, there's so much ways to make money in sports now that's like the academic stuff barely matters. And I know some people are going to say that that's absolutely, you know, probably wrong for me to say, and that it's not true. I'm not saying it in every case, but it seems that way, feels that way.
Well, to me, the way college football has arrived at 2024 with the realignment, the NIL, the transfer portal, everything that we're talking about, there are basically, I'm going to say, for me, 2 good outcomes. And that would be, number one, most importantly, that once, now I'll clarify this in a second, I did not want the Pac-12 to go away. In no such way. I would love there to be a Pac-12. I would love us to go back to 1985 and realign the conferences, etc. But when you do that, you consolidate teams into less conferences. Therefore, they got to run into each other more. Therefore, it's producing a lot better matchups. You know, we wouldn't have Penn State and Oregon. We wouldn't have Ohio State and Oregon. We wouldn't have Michigan and Oregon. We can go on through all the matchups, Oklahoma and Texas versus all the top programs in the SEC. So the schedules are better. We're getting to see matchups we would never see. And then the only other caveat to that is that I find it somewhat fun to reconfigure these leagues and conjecture and think about Clemson being in the Big 12 and what would that look like and how well would they play and how well have they played. But that's fairly insignificant. Everything else, I can't think of one positive in this that's good for college football.
I agree. And my biggest issue is with all these moves, it just creates more problems. Like, you're trying to make a solution to fix, like, okay, well, Pac-12's gone. You know, where all these teams are joining you, the Big 10 and the SEC and the ACC Big 12, and no one really even barely cares about them two anymore. because at the top is Big Ten, SEC. And it's like now you're having to make more moves. More teams are moving to more conferences, and you're having to make more decisions. You're having to make more decisions on NIL and the transfer portal and all this stuff. You're having to do this because of the fact that you've made these moves. It just creates more problems, and then you have to make more moves to try to fix those problems, which then create more problems. It's a never-ending cycle. It's never going to get fixed. You're never going to be able to create a system in the future that's going to be able to fix all these issues. It's impossible. And not that there weren't issues before. I mean, people talk about the BCS. That had problems. We know that the BCS system had problems. But now that you have the playoff, it has problems. And now that you do it to 12 teams, it's even got even more issues that people complain about. So it's never going to satisfy everybody. And there's always going to be issues involved. It's not perfect. And I do agree with you that the only thing that's good about it, all the realignment, is it does create better matchups. That's true. But with all the other problems that are going on and the issues that it is, I don't know if it's worth it. I'm not saying you said that it was, because you were against it too, but it isn't worth it at the end of the day, just for those better matchups. Especially you lose the culture and history. I mean, that to me is way more important than the matchups, because they could play each other in the non-conference, but they didn't want to do that because then it was going to hurt their chances of making the playoff. Which is why when you had the BCS, at least the teams cared about playing in the bowl games. Now the bowl games don't mean anything either. I love bowl season.
Hopefully,
and now
we
I
still
just
have
barely,
Jeffrey.
it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Bowl season's been ruined. And for a lot of people, it's been ruined a long time ago, but it's been pretty much done in by this 12-team playoff. It's going to be deemed even less significant. And Jeffrey, we appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to come back on the show. I'm not trying to be all negative or anything because of the fact, but I just can't wait for football season, and no one's barely talking about the games. I just want to watch some football. But last question, because you probably have someone else coming on. North Carolina, how do you think they're looking for next season? Because to me, I see them as another 6-6, 7-5 year. Not seeing anything better. People are mixed on them.
I do think that it's somewhat telling that if you look at the odds that Vegas released with Florida State, Clemson, and Miami pretty much co-favorites, they have almost exactly the same odds, that then it's NC State and Louisville. SMU is being given better odds by quite a bit than North Carolina and Virginia Tech, who I thought was going to be a hot commodity and a chic pick with all that returning production. But they're well down the pack. So North Carolina has been after Clemson and maybe somebody else, Florida State obviously recently, but since Mac Brown showed up and brought the program back a little bit, they've been one of the preseason favorites in the past, but they lost a lot of defensive talent. And I know that their defense was not great, but they lost
the only good players they had are gone.
Well, they wasted all that recruiting. They recruited very well on the defensive side of the ball, and they never posted a good defensive showing. So, and of course, Drake May's gone, and Max Johnson's a serviceable quarterback, but he's not Drake May. He's a statue for the most part. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Shouldn't call him a statue. He's a little more mobile than that, and he's a tough guy. I tell you, I have rarely seen a quarterback recently who's taken a beating like Max Johnson and hung in the pocket and delivered passes, but he's just not a great quarterback. Without looking at North Carolina's schedule, yeah, I would think that they're going to be a 7-5 team. I'm trying to think what their big non-conference game is. Can't think of it off the top of my head. I
can't remember it either. I haven't really.
They got Minnesota in week 1 on the road.
Yeah, that game. I remember that.
They could go win that game.
But I mean, the thing is with North Carolina that's frustrating is to your point, they wasted Drake May. They wasted Sam Howell. They had 2 really, really great quarterbacks, especially Drake May, and they barely won. They underperformed every time. So now it's like you've got a serviceable quarterback in Max Johnson. They're not going to be any better because the defense, they lost all that. The offense lost all that. It's very frustrating. North Carolina is a very frustrating team with Matt Brown because they've always underperformed. They had so much talent but didn't do anything with it. But hopefully they at least make a bowl game. But it's going to be very interesting. I can't wait. But thanks for having me on, Mark, and definitely can't wait to come back on soon as college football gets back closer. And hopefully that's where the discussion will move towards. Everyone like and subscribe to the Voice of College Football.
Good to see you, Jeffrey. Have a good day.
You too.
It's our guy Jeffrey showing up to talk some college football on day one of the ACC Kickoff, day 1 out of 4. Big Ten Media Days the next 3 days as well. So we will combine these shows to a certain extent. And again, we will be on location with Big Ten Media Days. We got, I believe we got Golden Playbook showing up for us.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me all right?
I can. What's going on?
I just had a few questions for you.
Sure.
So where do you think Miami is going to leave the ACC as well, or?
This is what I think, that Clemson and Florida State have 1.5 feet out the door. So I just don't see that being resolved. Of course, they've spent hundreds of $millions already in legal fees. So, okay, they're gone. North Carolina has come out in the last few months, and their athletic director has said, we need to get out of the ACC. And by all indications, North Carolina can go to the Big Ten. They can go to the SEC. They seem to have a pretty good decision in front of them and a landing spot that's going to be very beneficial for them. And then they're going to bring somebody with them, you would think, whether that's NC State or Virginia. So then that takes us to Miami. Now, what I have said pretty much from the beginning of all this unraveling with Clemson and Florida State in court is that we know that Wake, Syracuse, go on down the line of those low-end schools. They are just hoping that the ACC is able to survive this in some fashion so that they can keep their paycheck coming as a power conference. Then you got this tier of teams. Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, those three in particular, that I find very intriguing because they're the ones that are in the middle of determining, do we have value? Is somebody going to take us? Should we be trying to pull this league together and hold it together? Or should we be jumping ship and following Clemson and Florida State because we'll be able to land, you would think, in the Big 12. So Miami, they're kind of on their own tier. They're kind of on the tier above those teams. I wouldn't have given it much consideration months ago that they would land in the Big 12, but certainly the Big 12 would want them. Maybe I value, because I've been saying this for years, even way before realignment started, that if I were the Big Ten, I would go to Florida and I would get Florida and or Florida State, or not Florida State and or Miami, because the Big Ten doesn't have enough football players in their footprint. So Miami's going to be fine. They're not going to be left out, but I don't know that they're going to get their wish and land in the Big Ten or the SEC.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're saying that you think that the FSU may go to the because didn't they get rejected by the Big Ten? FSU.
Well, no, the Big Ten has not come out and rejected anyone. And we also need to keep in mind that for 6 months plus, the Big Ten had an application from Washington and Oregon, and it looked like they were denying them as well. But no, they were just waiting. The Big Ten seems to be leaning North Carolina and somebody else after Notre Dame, of course. Getting into the state of North Carolina is a big deal for all these schools, but you would think that getting into the state of Florida, if the Big Ten wants to go that far down south, would be a big deal for the Big Ten. Let me phrase it this way. Nobody knows. So if you listen to somebody and they say they know, they don't know. They can conjecture, and maybe they've got good sources, and those sources can give indications, but nobody knows right now. And also, even the people that are on the inside, they can only tell you which way it's being talked about and leaning in one direction or another right now. Even the sources that were cited in the Brett McMurphy article from last week from the SEC and the Big Ten, the university presidents, they all said, we don't want anyone, but you never know what could happen. Things could change. So it's a guessing game.
Yeah. Well, that's all I wanted to ask you. And another thing, I do think that Notre Dame will join, hopefully, the Big Ten the next. I think it's probably going to take at least 5 years.
So you want them to join the Big Ten?
I don't really want them to join, but then again, I guess I wouldn't mind it. Because I think it, even though my thing is that the playoffs is expanded now, I feel like they have an easier path to the playoffs. I don't really think they should join, but if they do, I guess I wouldn't mind it. Which it seems like that's what they're going to do in the next 5 years.
Why do you think that?
I just think, I don't know. I just feel like they're going to eventually be forced to join a conference.
Okay. Yes. So that's where I was going, is that if college football organizes, because college football is not organized right now. Every conference is organized in and of itself, but there's no one to coordinate all of it other than they cooperate to run a playoff, and they cooperate to schedule non-conference games and bowl games. But the ACC runs their league, the SEC, the Big Ten. Nothing made this more self-evident than the COVID season. They all will just do what they want. And it's not the NFL. There's no structure in place to govern them. So they will run their leagues the way they want. Now, with the Big Ten and the SEC announcing a few months ago that they would have an advisory committee because they're seeing all these issues in college football, the transfer portal, NIL, realignment, all these things that need to be addressed. If they take over the sport, then I would envision them strong-arming Notre Dame into a conference and basically saying, you're the only one left out, and that's not going to fly, and you need to be in a conference or we're going to leave you out of everything. But otherwise, Notre Dame loves its independence, obviously, and continues to make statements that they will hold on to their independence. And if I was Notre Dame, I would do the same thing. So I don't blame Notre Dame in any way. They're doing what's best for them. Everybody's doing what's best for themselves. That's part of the problem. All right, Golden Playbook. Anything else? I think we've lost Golden Playbook, but we appreciate you being here. Look at this guy on the screen right here. Look at this guy. We got Jackson chipping in with a Voice of College Football membership. I believe there's another one out there. So 2 lucky folks, you get Voice of College Football memberships, which means I will have to remember when we get done here to leave the link. It will be in the community section of the channel. So that will only go to members, and you will have your link to the Discord. And we will be making announcements in the next few weeks about what we will do concerning our community. But you get an exclusive live, or you get an exclusive piece of content, whether that's a record, whatever your request per month, but it's per request. Hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. And we may do something with the predictions this year that's a little bit different than what we did last year, because we want you folks that value predictions, good predictions, that you're going to get those. And for those people that don't care to hear my predictions, I don't want to make that a benefit for people that don't care. So Thank you all for being here. I don't see any other comments or questions there in the chat. But again, thank you so much, Jackson, for being here for us and gifting 2 memberships. There you go, Jason. Absolutely. That's not going to happen, but that can force something. That situation can force something. If that, in fact, happens where somebody else takes over college football, meaning the SEC and the Big Ten, and they say, Notre Dame, you can't just be floating out here forever by yourselves. This is not 1990 when South Carolina was an independent and Miami and BYU and Louisville, and we could go all over the place with independents. Penn State and Pitt and Boston College and Syracuse and West Virginia, and all these teams were independents. No, they're the last ones standing. I know technically UConn's an independent, UMass is an independent, but nobody cares about them. They are not a factor. But yes, the I will forget my previous point and go to this. Notre Dame is literally the most valuable college football property. I don't know that anyone's run numbers on that. I'm not debating that it is. However, they're certainly not drawing the most money. And they're not even close. If you do the calculations like this, the proper way to do the calculations is not that Big Ten teams are going to be in the $85 to $90 million range starting next season with the new TV contract, and Notre Dame's going to be wherever they are. I don't remember where that number is, 30, 35 million. That's not even a fair representation of the gap, what the gap could be. If the Big Ten went to an unequal, it would be a fair distribution. But if they did a cost analysis, if they did a value analysis, if they had consultants come in and say, review these football programs, review the TV ratings, review the influence, review everything, and give us an accurate breakdown of which programs are the most valuable in the Big Ten. And right now they're all getting and will be getting 2024-25 going forward, 85 to 90 million. Like, don't think that if it was fairly distributed based on the TV numbers that Ohio State would go from 90 million to just 98 million, 102 million, and then Michigan would just go from 90 million to 97 million or whatever the figure. No. Let's take 90 million times 18. That's a tough number to deal with. What is that? If it was 20, it would be 1.8 billion, right? So it's about 1.6 something billion. No, the disparities would not be 10 million. No, Ohio State would shoot up to 200 million, 250 million. Michigan would shoot up 250 million. That might be underestimating it. So either Notre Dame is not the most valuable commodity in college football, or they've certainly cut a horrible deal. All right. Yes, Dave, they are paying Notre Dame less than Indiana. So again, I know that Notre Dame is worth far more than Indiana. We know that. However, the price of being an independent has cost Notre Dame and continues to cost them a lot of money. But they have sovereignty. They are their own boss. They don't have to sit in a boardroom with the chancellor of the University of Illinois and Purdue and Northwestern and just have one vote out of 18, or what would be 20 or 24. So they value their independence. their sovereignty. They also value their name brand being separate from everyone else and being able to do what they want. I would too, but it's costing them money. And we will see whether the structure of the sport is moving in a direction where it's going to be taken over by the SEC and the Big Ten, and they will force Notre Dame, or the money disparity year after year after year after year will just become so great that Notre Dame will finally say, Uncle, the gap is going to be greater than this, but it was thrown out at $40 million during the ACC news conference with Jim Phillips today. So $40 million is a lot of money, but to schools and football programs, it's a lot of money, sure, but it's not that 40 million. That's 40 million per team per season. So that's 40 million. Oh, you've got 17 teams in the conference. Oh, that's $680 million. That's the gap for this year. Oh, 10 years from now, that's $680 million. $6.8 billion. All right, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We record with Steve Dace in a couple hours. You'll see that, I believe, on Wednesday. We record tomorrow with Phil Steele. You'll see that, I believe, on Thursday. Big week here at the Voice of College Football, so keep it locked in. Big Ten Media Days. We will be live at Big Ten Media Days on Tuesday. Appreciate you being here. Next show, got the Texas Live show at 7 Eastern. We got USC Live, the Trojan Conquest show at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific time. Join Tim, Matt, and myself over on the USC channel. If you missed part of this show, you'll want to go back, see what you missed, and we will see you next time. 7 o'clock Eastern, Texas, 10 Eastern, USC.